in case when we get up. So thank you also everyone that's live streaming as well. We've got to go out live, so and watch it at home. Thank you very much. Right, so this is the third stop on the Darwin Data World Tour. So we've already done Zurich and Munich, been great success. And then after Copenhagen, we will have Berlin, Boston, New York, and Amsterdam. So still a bit left to go. Now, if you are unable to attend, because it's quite a trip to go out there, we're also including the slides. So not only from Darwin, but from all our speakers. So you'll still be able to get kind of full meetup sort of process as it would be. So regarding the order for tonight, first up we will have Gopal Karemore from Novo Nordisk, and then Kim Falk from LiveIntent, and then Jarnus on the end from Danske Bank. So before we go on to there, just obviously as you can see behind me, Darwin have got a great competition on at the moment for 2 tickets to Data Native. So that will be on the 22nd and the 23rd of November. That'll be in Berlin. So the tickets are nicely supplied by Data Native, and the accommodation is sorted out by Darwin. So combined, we're looking at a prize that's worth about £1,800, which I think is great for something that's free to enter. So now it's only for people like yourself who are attending. If you're watching online, unfortunately not, but I would advise you look out for Data Native near you. Go along with some great stuff there, some really interesting subjects. If you look inside the blue books we've all provided, later on it'll have all things you need to know about the competition. So after the speakers, feel free to have a look through and sign up. Now, a bit more about Darwin, why we're doing it as well today. So as a business, we've been operating for over 17 years as a recruitment consultant business. So we have offices in Billericay, which is just outside of London, where I am from. And then we have Amsterdam, Munich, Zurich. Recently also opened up a place in Boston. So trying to get into the American market, which is going really well. All combined, we're looking at about 150 people, give or take, sort of there or thereabouts. Now, how those people are arranged is done more firstly into geographical locations. So there'll be myself, obviously, for Denmark. We also have a Mr. Alex Hookins, who is hiding in the crowd somewhere, who is the manager for the Danish team, and then also a Samuel Sargent right at the back there hiding as well. He does Sitecore and .NET as a senior consultant for Denmark. So outside, then again, deeper in from our geographical locations, we have specialisms. So mine would be in the data world, obviously, so I'm here. And then also in other areas, we'll have a Josh Barber and a Wesley Can. They do data in Sweden and also in Norway. So if any of you are interested in data and you're looking to move a little bit around, 2 great guys, I'll introduce you to them later. Some really good insight into that market as well. Now, the reason we do that is on a country-wide way, we get a good understanding of the kind of culture that's there, kind of people, their attitudes, and then even deeper into that, we get to go into the specialists and the verticals, and we get an understanding of what candidates are looking for, what's important to them. We also get an understanding of what is important to clients, so the skill bases, the attitudes, the things that can be important to that front as well. So they know that when we go to them, that our conversations will be relevant, they will be of use, and the network that we reach out to will also be justified and will be of help to them in one way or another. I am sure you've all been contacted by recruitment companies with a job that means absolutely nothing to you, and they can't work out why they contacted you. So we do our best to specialise and avoid such situation. So regarding Darwin's kind of attitude towards data, it's always been there from sort of BI roles many years ago and statistical analysis and all the other words. And then as time has come on, we've seen the change into kind of data engineers, data scientists, the more maybe modern terms of use for it, and everything else, the titles you can imagine. And we've really established that as the future. So not only just future of certain departments, but the future of our business is what we want to head up and continue to go down that way. Now, from my opinion on the Danish market, more specifically around Copenhagen, we spend a little bit of time where we may be on the back foot to maybe sort of places like Germany in Europe that are maybe a little bit more data mature. But what I'm seeing now is a real kind of upwards curve and a real climb while Denmark and Copenhagen look to catch up. So, really exciting times on that. So in the past, we would have finance, pharmaceutical, e-commerce that would adopt data quite quickly and have seen the value in doing so. Now we're seeing other parts of businesses, other areas, are bringing in data into their team, noticing the value and really making it not just something they come to every now and again, but a way they actually look to take the business and how they're going to map out their plans for the future, which is fantastic. So even onto that, what I'm noticing more recently, the last few months, is we're having businesses that aren't just using data as a department or someone they can kind of go to. It's also the exact point and nucleus to their product. So things that are arranged around AI and ML. NLP is a client I was talking to where their product is based around that, really interesting. So that kind of thing a while ago maybe wasn't there. Now we're seeing that in Copenhagen and throughout Denmark as well to a certain extent, there's opportunities to work with some of the most exciting sort of skills and really work on some of the most exciting projects around in the world stage. So I think that's really cool. I think it is a great time for people like yourselves to have a look into other roles. And if it's not other roles, it's even in your own business. Look to grow your teams, look to make the most out of data and what it can do for you. If you do and want to look into that, I'll be around after. We can have a great discussion, and also the same with Wes, Josh, when their taxi arrives, they'll also welcome a conversation with the rest of you. Right, I won't give you any more top-level conversation than what I believe, so I'll hand over to Gopal, and he'll go through what he wants to go through.
Am I audible? Yeah. Yes. Okay, so good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming. And thank you, Josh and Luke, for introducing me and inviting me for this talk. Okay. So my talk is AI in healthcare and pharmaceutical industry. I know it is a very difficult task to cover it in 30 minutes, right? But I will try my best. Okay, so a little bit of my background. So I have a bachelor and master's degree from India, Indian universities, and then I did my PhD in computer science from University of Copenhagen. And then I have been working in medical imaging, machine learning, artificial intelligence in few industries before I joined Novo Nordisk recently, 2 months ago, as a principal data scientist in modeling and predictive technology department. So let's agree to disagree, or hopefully agree that what is AI, right? There has been a lot of dispute about the definition of AI. So AI is a machine which can do cognitive tasks. For example, it can perceive, it can solve problem, it can do reasoning, and it can learn from data, right? This is what human beings are doing. And there are different types of AI. So one is a purely reactive AI, which you see normally in the news these days, like a gaming, right? Like the Google DeepMind, AlphaGo. And then we have a limited memory AI, which is like chatbots, for example, or self-driving car. And then theory of mind AI, which is kind of a robotics, you see. I mean, if you have seen the Star Wars, that is basically that kind of AI we're talking about. And there is a superhuman level AI, which is called a self-aware AI. Okay, I don't know if you have seen the Ex Machina, EVA, kind of that. So that's basically our end goal to reach. So if you see artificial intelligence, general term artificial intelligence, it's called artificial intelligence for layman's language. But for statistician or mathematician, that's called the machine learning. And there is a sub-branch, which is very specialized branch these days, very popular, called as deep learning, which is the sub-branch of machine learning, which basically extract the meaningful information from data itself for the task that is given to this. Okay, but deep learning, people say that deep learning is just the recent techniques, but there is a long history behind deep learning. And if you can see here, The deep learning has there since 1940s, ever since the McCulloch and Pitts developed first electronic brain. Okay, and then after that, the Rosenblatt, they developed a technique called as a perceptron. That was very popular for 10 years, right? And everybody was thinking that there has something in AI to give to the technology, to the people. But there was a time when came 1969, where McKenzie published a paper saying that perceptron killing perceptron. What does it mean? So perceptron is not able to solve XOR problem, which is just very logical for a human being, right, with a Boolean algebra. And there was, from that time, there was a dark age for AI. So till the end, when Geoffrey Hinton, who is actually a great-great-grandson of Bull scientist Sir Bull, who developed Boolean arithmetics, not Bull, right? So, and then he developed a technique called as a backpropagation. So you can develop your multi-perceptron level way of approach with a restricted Boltzmann machine, that's called as a RBF. Okay, and then so there was a time when people started again thinking that okay, there has some AI there has something to do with AI, and there is a lot of implication of AI in the technology. But then and then it just suddenly goes down, and because of some reason, and that reason is basically we did not have enough data, or we did not have enough computation power for that time. And then in 2000s, Wapnick and Cortez developed a technique called as a support vector machine, and that was quite popular, and that has actually revolutionized many different aspects of the technology. But recently, in 2010, when Geoffrey Hinton came back again, and then they developed a technique called as a deep neural network, which basically uses the pre-training and also the development over the deep belief network. And also at the same time, there was an evolution of a data collection also. So data generation has increased tremendously. As you can see, in 1991, that was the first when the World Web was established, right? And then there was a debut of Facebook and YouTube in 2004 and 5. And then they came, the University of California, Berkeley started Spark. So you can see that there was an increment of the data also, data generation. And also if you see the third aspect, which is the computation power, that has also gained a power. So IBM has introduced Deep Blue, and then there was AWS, and the Hadoop, and then GPU. And now you can see the state of the art, which we are talking now, that's the present, that Google also developed some kind of TPUs, tensor processing unit, right? We have big data, we have a cloud structure, cloud computing. And then we have a state-of-the-art techniques such as, there is a lot of active area of research in deep learning, like hyperparameter tuning or the activation function discovery and things like that. So the AI in pharmaceuticals, mainly they have an application in drug discovery process and drug development process. So what is that? So before you understand this AI in pharmaceutical, it is important to understand what is drug discovery, right? I'm not sure if you are aware of this one. So that's why I thought of having this slide, so that you can just get a rough idea. I know it's not possible in 30 minutes to explain you what drug discovery is, right? But drug discovery starts with a pre-discovery, which is called as target selection. So what you do is, every pharmaceutical companies focus on particular disease area, right? For example, Novo Nordisk focus on diabetes. So to understand diabetes, to develop a chemical which can react with this or can cure that disease, first you have to understand the mechanism of that disease. And that process is called as the target selection. So first you need to understand the mechanism of protein, receptor, enzyme, which are responsible for that disease. And that phase is target selection, okay? Then the second stage is the drug discovery. So you found a mechanism, then you have to find a chemical, that which chemicals are responsible, can target to that particular receptor, so that to cure the cancer or cure a particular disease. And we have the chemical compound, right? There's an enormous amount of chemical compound. So it is a really tedious job. But so normally that's called the hit selection. So that step is called as hit selection. And normally you get 10,000 compounds, chemical compounds, and then you filter in around 250 compounds, followed by 5 compounds. And what are the evaluation criteria for that? There are so many aspects of evaluation criteria. One can be stability, can be a potency, can be efficacy of the disease. So there are, and then after that, you file for a patent, right? And once you file for the patent, you submit your application to FDA, which is the regulatory authorities. And then if everything goes well, they will ask you to go for clinical trials, okay? And then there are different phases in clinical trials. So phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 is also called as the first in human, proof of concept, and randomized controlled trials. So the whole point is, and after that, once you do all these successful clinical trials, and when you collect the result, and if you see the Cox regression survival analysis, then you really know whether or not your compound is active or it is accepted by FDA or not, or if it's helpful for that particular disease. So if you see all this aspect of drug discovery, there is AI implications, and I'm going to tell you how AI is going to affect each and every steps of this drug discovery process. Okay, so target selection, as you see, one can have enzyme, proteins, receptor, oligonucleotides. So for example, you just focus for hypertension regulation pathway, or it can be another disease pathway. So here, mostly this knowledge has come from academia. This is what the academia people will do, right? Also the genomics, system biology, bioinformatics, they work on drug discovery. And you know that there are so many papers, journals only dedicated for this particular domain of a science, okay? And there are so many machine learning approaches to solve this problem of target selection. So I just have a use case. So this use case is from the Novo Nordisk Foundation, where I was working before, Center for Protein Research, just to show you how the machine learning can be used for target selection. So, and of course, the work has been published in Nature Communications, so you can just go through this link and review more. So the whole aim here was that we knocked down 47 validated mitotic regulators. So what is mitotic regulators? So, and then we correlated the mitotic errors with a DNA damage, DNA breakage. Okay, that was a discovery basically, because everybody knows that okay, there is a DNA breakage. That was the reason why there is a cancer, right? But there is very few study which says the mechanism of this DNA breakage. Okay, and this whole group is actually working on that. And then we also show that this DNA breakage is also preceded by replication stress. I don't know if you know about the life cycle of the cell, G1, G2, and then S phase. So this is whole mechanism. So we have basically come up with some knowledge of understanding that why DNA breakage is happening, and that it correlates with the DNA breakage, DNA mitotic error actually. So I use the generic machine learning framework to use this and to resolve this issue. So what is that? So in cell-based assay, that is called as siRNA screening. What you do is you transfect siRNAs which are targeting for multiple genes. Okay, so what you do is you then get and stain for different antibodies or protein of your interest, and then you acquire images using confocal microscopy. So ultimately, in technical sense, what you get is there is a different images for one particular genes, and you have so many genes and so many siRNA targeting for that genes. Now the problem is, how do you classify phenotypically different genes with their characteristics, right? It is impossible for a human being to do that. This was just 47. Imagine if you go for the human genome, it's more than, they are in thousands, right? So it's impossible for a human being to do that. And this is where the machine learning is applicable. So what we did is we extracted, this was our protein of interest, BP1, gamma H2X, P53. These are all known for happening mitotic damage. We have acquired images for that, and then we extracted features on that. And then we did a multi-parametric machine learning on this. So as you can see here, this is the training phase, testing phase, and you can see this logistic regression and symbol modeling. As you can see, I don't have time to go into detail of that, but I hope that I'm just giving you a kind of teaser, and then you can go in detail with the link that I provided. Okay. So the result is this one. So result is that you get a nice collection of the classification, clusters of different genes in two different dimensions. One is the mitotic aberrations and the probability of increased DNA damage. And with this idea, biologists can segregate which genes are responsible or which siRNAs are responsible for particular classes, right? And then they can classify it and understand more about this. So you can see here that these are the, it's not only they have the high DNA damage, but also high mitotic aberrations. And you can see here the mitotic aberrations, how they look like as compared to the control. You can see the cells are dividing nicely without any problem. Okay. Now, so this was the target selection. Now, second step, as I said in this funnel picture, there's a lead discovery, right? So once you have decided, okay, what is your target, then you go for finding a chemical which can actually target for that particular receptor. That field is called the lead discovery. And so you can see here there's a chemical compound, and the number of chemical compound, viable chemical compounds, are 10 to the power 6, and this number is even more than the number of atoms in the observable universe. So imagine it's impossible for scientists or any pharmaceutical industry to do this manually, right? Going into the laboratory and testing and trying each and every chemical compound. But so there are some techniques available for this one to resolve this, that which chemical compound should be selected as a target. So there is a virtual screening, compound design, energy calculation. So all these techniques, 20 years ago, this has been random forest or support vector machine has been state of the art for this particular techniques. But because of this deep learning network, people are finding nice results with using this one, with a more efficient and more accurate, right? This one. Energy calculation, here we do a lot of quantum mechanics calculations to see which compound, the target and the receptor and the compound, how they interact with each other, what are their energy level, right? Because they have to be stable, so that's why the energy level should be low. So it's an optimization problem. We have a structure activity relationship, so how the protein ligands are actually behaving with each other. This is very important. Here also we do a lot of machine learning on this. Then we have this ADME, which is called as absorption, dissolution, metabolism, and excretion. These are the different factors by which you rank your candidate, right? And then drug target interactions. So I'm just going to give you, by the way, this is called computer-aided drug discovery. So you apply machine learning and modeling from this one. So just one use case program. So the application of deep learning in compound property and activity prediction. So you can see here that whenever you develop any medicine, right, you have to find a compound which can target, but also it should have a minimal effect on as off-target effect, right? So it should not have any kind of some false positives, right? So how to do that? So for that, it is very important that the compound that you are trying to test, you should know the molecular activity, or what is their activity profile. To predict what is the activity profile, you can use machine learning for that. And this was the entire the problem by the Merck. And there is a data set available. So if you want to try and test on your technique, you can just go into Kaggle, download it, and you work on your system. Okay. So and there are some effort in this field, working on different techniques such as deep convolutional neural network or CNN to resolve this problem. For example, in this case, you can see here there is a chemical structure here, and you try to iterate and increase your kernel size, and for every kernel size you develop your neural network just like a one layer neural network, and then you make a fully connected neural network to get the predictions out. Okay, details will be here. Also there has been an effort in designing, that's called as a de novo design through deep learning. So is it possible that we can synthesize our chemical compound by using machine learning? And this was the effort. Normally technical domain is called the encoder decoder problem, or you can say generative adversarial neural network, right? So there has been a GAN application in this case. So you can see there is a chemical compound, you project that chemical compound in latent space, and then you do some kind of distributions, some perturbations, and try to then decode it, and then hopefully that chemical compound is what you're looking for, right? Of course, there will be always a validation. So you don't have to depend completely on the computer. There will always be a validation in the experimental domain, right? But it's very good, right? It's improving. Then also there is an application for recurrent neural networks in drug discovery and finding a chemical compound. So I don't know if you know about the SMILE. SMILE is kind of in technical domain. If you happen to work on NLP problem, there is a word to vec, right? And there is a GLOW kind of a representation. So if you have a natural language word, you can represent that as a vector. In that field, the chemical compound can also be represented as a one hot encoding, if you know that, right? One hot encoding. So that's called as a SMILES. And then of course, once you have a SMILES, you can apply the recurrent neural network as if you are working on chatbot, for example, when you develop RNN, right? So this is the whole effort for that. So you basically get a compound which can be a viable compound of your interest. Now there has also been an application in CNN, okay? So protein ligand structure were discretized into the grid of resolution, and once you have a 2D matrix of course, nobody will stop you to apply CNN on that, right? Once you have a 2D matrix. So people have also been utilizing the CNN in getting this network to predict the protein ligand interactions. Okay, but there was so far what was happening is that the machine learning was used to predict some chemical compound, right? Which was not fancy, I would say, right? I mean there was some techniques which was available previously also. What has happened this year? That is the biggest discovery and achievement in this field. There was a paper in Nature. So it's not only you can predict what chemical compound using machine learning, but you can also know or predict how that chemical compound should be synthesized. So you get basically instruction how that chemical compound can be synthesized. This is amazing discovery in this field. So that's basically just teaser about how deep learning is affecting in lead discovery, right? But also the second step, if you can see, there is a clinical trials, right? This is what we have to go through this funnel shape stuff. And the AI is also affecting clinical trials. So if you see the first one, that's finding and enrolling the right candidate for the trial. It's very important because the power or the statistical power of the test of your whole clinical trials depends on how accurate, how coherent is your data set, which is exactly the same as what we do in machine learning, right? We try to eliminate all the outliers and stuff to make it our data more homogeneous. So it's exactly the same thing what we can do in clinical trials using machine learning. Okay. Second thing is the medication adherence. So of course these days what happens is that's the next step actually, but the whole idea is that we want more patient so that we have more data so that we can extract more information. Okay. So when I say adherence monitoring is that can we use a technology or machine learning so that we can actually use an IoT application, Internet of Things, to record all the biological parameters which will be used to monitor whether or not your drug which is in the clinical trial is affecting or not, right? So one can use that technique there. So just to understand what randomized controlled trials are, so you have a population here. You randomly assign that population into treatment and the placebo where you don't give any treatment. There will be an investigator who will be blinded, right? And then that investigator will treat those population with the active compound of your interest. And then over time, you just follow those patients and the placebo group and then see how many of them have cured disease or how many are survived or what was the mortality rate basically, okay? So in this case, what happens is that depends on how good is your population. This is what I was talking about. If you use AI in selecting the coherent population and also increasing the sample size, or in this case to monitor, right? Because currently monitoring of the patients happens using electronic health record, EHR, and that is not an optimal technique, right? Because EHR, one patient can go in multiple hospitals and multiple hospitals will have a different EHR formats. So how to integrate it? It's very difficult. It is possible, it's difficult. Right now it's not possible. So can we use this IoT? Can we use a mobile device just to monitor their parameters so that that will help in evaluating the progress of that disease, okay? So there has been a lot of effort in this field, and you can see the Deep6 AI, that's a company, they just basically match, it's matchmaking basically, right? So if you have a disease, they will tell you whether or not you are, for that particular clinical trial is useful for you or not, right? So that's very interesting, right? So the pharmaceutical industry do not have to do these promotions, right? I mean, anybody who is interested in joining the clinical trials that can come to these techniques. So you basically extract, analyze, and connect. So then there is also another company called Antidote. They are not the only company, that's just the popular company, you see. So they also do the same thing, yeah, the population selection. And the reason is also because the 80% of clinical trials fails is because there is a less adherence and the patient populations are not coherent. So these techniques in future is going to improve the power of your statistical test, which will be used by FDA authority to whether or not to see if the clinical trials went well or not. Right? Also, beyond EHR, electronic health record, as I mentioned, one can use a mobile device to collect patient data. And there has been research by IBM, so they have actually open sourced this kit also. So one can just download their app. Novo also has their own app for the clinical trials and for the patients to just monitor their parameters day-to-day life. So of course, as I said, more participant, more data, and so the more meaningful results, right? Okay, so and there are so many pharma companies actually. They have realized the importance of AI in their each and every aspects of their whole company, right? In all the structures. So Pfizer for IBM, Roche, Jarnus Healthcare, and the list goes on, right? On and on. So, and of course, you want to see what Novo is also up to. You can see that link, right? And this is what we have been trying enormously these days, and we also looking for people who can do that. So that will be my last slide. So, okay, so AI in healthcare. Let's see. So AI in healthcare market is seeking explosive growth. So you can see here that we are a deficit of 20%, right? We don't have enough clinician for the clinical demand, right? So we have to take care of technology, right? And we have to ask technology what they can provide for us, and that's very important. It's not the choice; it's going to be a need, right? And you can also see that that the AI market investment has gone up 11-fold increment. And it will be actually in 2021. So there has been a lot of effort in AI healthcare. So how does it affect? So AI can affect in many domains. Keeping well, for example, Internet of Medical Things. This is a new concept is coming up. So you see all the wearable device. They collect they monitor all your health parameters, and they can suggest you what is happening with you, right? Or what parameters you should be worried about, right? Then there is early detection, digital pathology, detection by radiomics. Diagnosis, everybody knows about Google DeepMind, IBM Watson Health. Well, there has been a lot of controversies, but there has been an effort in this field, okay? Decision making, clinical decision support system, people have been enormously using, especially doctors in the Western world. And the highly complex surgical robots, that's a treatment. Yeah, that's where the AI is also affecting. End of life care, the humanoid kind of a domestic health, that can be a possibility of AI, and people are working on that. There are companies actually building a humanoid. Okay. Drug discovery research, we just have seen that. And then virtual or augmented reality, especially for the training. If you see in the University of Copenhagen, medical students, they get the atlases, they get the virtual box where they can see without being intervention, right? Or intervening something, a live body. So there's a lot of simulation and virtual reality is going on in medical field, medical domain. You also see the data types considered in AI, diagnostic imaging, genetic, diagnostic imaging, because that comes under radiologist domain, right? Because there's so many images coming up there. Yeah. So I think I will just leave this because this is just showing that clinical activities. So what a clinician does is it collects information, but that information is also structured, and it can also be the handwritten notes. So AI is actually using natural language processing to convert that handwritten text into some information, and that will be fed up to the machine learning, and so that we improve the quality of the treatment. Also, you can see that the disease area that is affected by AI. First one is prominent is neoplasm, which is actually cancer in common terminology, then nervous system, cardiovascular disease. Also, you can see support vector machine here and neural network that has dominated this entire domain. So there was a use case actually. I wanted to show you that how the machine learning is using in a diagnostic imaging marker. So you can see here that the breast cancer, when you say breast cancer, currently the radiologists that they see, when they see the mammogram, they look for the breast density. That is the accepted evaluation criteria to see whether or not you have a possibility of becoming a breast cancerous or not, right? And you can see that there is, but that is not true always, because you can see here this one mammogram here, which has the same percentage density, but they have a life risk are different. You see this 20% and it's 3%, even if the breast density is the same for them. So there must be some other information that we are losing, right? And the question is, can we ask AI to extract that extra information that radiologists cannot see it, right? And that was the whole effort that we actually did it during my PhD days. So we extracted features and we did some machine learning on that. Not only we can develop a diagnostic marker, but we can also develop the prognostic marker. What is prognostic marker? So you have some treatment. So you have a baseline mammograms, and then you have follow-up mammogram after the interventions. So is there any technique by which radiologist can be guided that which region of the mammogram has got most affected because of the treatment? And that can be possible using machine learning, right? That's basically vector geometry that I did, but you can see that which region is mostly affected from baseline to follow-up. Of course, these are all the techniques. One can also have a subtype specific imaging marker through AI. So you can see here that it doesn't matter which cancer you have, invasive or non-invasive. If you take a tamoxifen, the risk reduction, there is a lot of risk reduction, right? So the survival rate increases when you take a tamoxifen, right, for the cancer. But the problem is that tamoxifen works only if you are ER positive, right, efficiently. So if the woman is ER negative, there is no point in taking tamoxifen for her. So is there any way that AI can tell just by looking at mammogram whether or not this woman is ER positive or ER negative without going to the pathology and biopsy? So that was that work I did in UPenn. So you can see here this fancy. The whole idea was that we have radiologist scoring, we have imaging biomarker using AI, and then if we take personal risk, then we can develop tailored screening and risk reduction. So it's a personalized healthcare basically. This is what our AI, I think, can help us to go there. Okay, there was this video which I'm not going to show you now, but this is an amazing video, and this is a Babylon. This is a mobile app. What they do is it's a UK-based company, and it was also accepted by NHS, which is National Health Services from UK, right? So it's accredited. So what they do is they do natural language processing. They ask you, that's like a video consultation. They ask you so many parameters, and then they can provide you the primary health care. Like what is the possible, what should be the reason for you to have an influenza or the stomach pain or something like that. And they will not tell you anything, treatment, but they will tell you what is happening with you using the knowledge of the literatures and the natural language processing. So I advise you to just go through this video. It was amazing. Of course, challenges are you have adoption. It is very difficult for a society to adopt, yeah, especially in the healthcare, and also training doctors and patients, which is very hard, right? Because, well, they have been trained for a long time for not having AI. And the regulation, of course, this is a major problem for pharmaceutical industry and for the hospitals, right? Because we have FDA. FDA will not accept any data generated by machine learning unless you explain them how you have generated, which is, we know that it's very difficult using deep learning, right? That's the whole idea of explainable AI. So that there are some problems, but I think, yeah, we will resolve this. And just lastly, what are the skill set required for data scientists? I think, of course, this is the intersection of computer science, mathematics, statistics, and the domain knowledge, right? So if we have all these three, that's well and good. But if we do not have it, then of course you can jump in either way. But if you really want a real data scientist skill, then you have to have these three domain knowledge. And of course, machine learning, you should have also these days the hands-on on all deep learning libraries, right? Doesn't matter if you do TensorFlow, Luzano, or or PyTorch, doesn't matter. But at least you should understand what is happening in this field, and you should be able to program it. Okay, and then these days, that was a history actually, but right now you need a knowledge of cloud computing, right? If you want to be a data scientist, then you have to have a knowledge of this one. And also the business intelligence platform. So it doesn't matter which layer you work on, right? The infrastructure layer or the platform layer or the desktop layer. It depends on what company you're looking for, right? So if it is a big company, you do not have to work on all the layers, but it's better to have a knowledge of everything. As I would advise, go to the AWS stuff, a cloud guru. And then of course the data visualization software. This is very important because many organizations are using now these as a dashboard. So knowledge of that is very important for you becoming a data scientist. And of course the learning resources, right? I don't have to tell about this because the reason why you came here is because of this one. So, but I would advise you to just go through this Medium, Kaggle, Analytics Vidya, Quora, KD Nuggets, and then so many publications, right, these days. So thank you so much for your attention. And Novo Nordisk, actually, we are very interested. If you're passionate, if you want to solve, if you want to contribute to the human life, resolving the problem that what Novo Nordisk is actually focusing on, please come and join us. There has been an opening for data scientists. Yes, and if you want, please have a talk with me. Okay, thank you so much. a question.
Q&A this time.
Yeah, of course, yeah, that's what this one here. And I will give you this one.
Right to go through, forward and left to go back. Yeah, you just take that. You just take that. If you go for it's off at the moment, switch it back on. If you could introduce Kim just as normal. Pop that on, just put it in your pocket. This is directional.
Yes. Right, there you go, Paul. Next up, we're going to have
just remember to keep the microphone close to
Kim
the mouth.
from LiveIntent.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm going to test that on there. We should be good to go.
Should have great interest on your own. So I'll pass you over. So he's not beatboxing. Yeah.
Can anybody hear me if I don't use a mic?
Anyone in the back?
Okay.
Yeah.
I should use the mic? Okay. Okay.
This is my domain. Sorry, guys. Bear with me.
So how do you come after that? I'm just playing with data. The worst thing that happens if something goes wrong here is that somebody watches a bad movie or something. So in my defense, I did talk with a guy from New York who was trying to recommend foster parents to children using recommender systems. But he abandoned the project again because it didn't work well. So it's your time that I'm taking.
Yeah, that's fine. I can talk anywhere from 5 minutes to 3 hours.
Sorry, guys. We're going to turn it down. I can't seem to get this one to work, so if you could just try and project, try your best to project. If anyone in the back can't hear, there's a few seats at the front, but we are having some problems with the microphone in here, so yeah, just listen really carefully. Sorry about that.
Okay. So my name is Kim. I'm a senior data scientist at LiveIntent. We do email campaigns, ads in emails, and on the internet. So basically, I say that I teach machines to stalk people. But yeah, I have half an hour, and I will try to talk about, or I will talk about, what is the recommender problem of a recommender system, some ways to solve it. Then I will talk a little bit about how you handle new users and new content, and then in the end I will just give a list of things that you should consider when you do a recommender systems. I don't think you will save any lives doing it. So quickly, what is a recommender? If you look at this picture, it's a mosaic that is made out of the popular videos of YouTube at a certain moment. I don't know how it's calculated because actually I don't think that there is a lot. But the problem that a recommender system is trying to solve is not to magically get content out of nowhere. It's trying to help you filter through all these things. Another recommender system, or to give a few examples of recommender systems, is, for example, the Spotify recommender who gave music while I did this presentation, or the BT video on demand platform, which basically is like Netflix, but I helped implement this one. Then there is the Amazon that everybody knows, and Netflix that everybody hates, and that's basically everybody knows the recommender system nowadays. Just to give a quick example, here's a prime example of a user of a recommender system. My son of 7, I know for English standards it's a bit odd, but he doesn't know how to write, so he just this week learned how to write Indoraptor in the search field of YouTube. But he uses it, and he has taught YouTube what his taste is. So whenever he opens it, it comes with Minecraft videos of dinosaurs and stuff like that. And in a certain sense, I'm really happy that YouTube is working so well because it keeps him away from all the murderous things that you also find on YouTube. And I'm really afraid when he starts knowing how to save or to search for things. Anyway, so this is the problem that you're trying to solve. You could also say that if you're a doctor, then this could be scientific articles instead, or something similar, a little bit more important. But anyway, you get the picture.
There is also a slightly different case that is also discussed a lot in research these days, is what is the next best action you should do. Again, you could do the research analogy and say, what kind of medicine should you take next? What kind of exercise should you do? But I used YouTube instead. There are different types of categories of recommender systems, and basically they fall into two categories. There is, of course, discussions about everything, but mainly there are these two categories. One is collaborative filtering, which is focused on using the behavioral data of users or the interactions between a user and the content. That can either be, I'll say that in the next slide. Then there is content-based filtering, which uses the metadata about the content. I also write users here because you can also try to extract metadata about the users, but in most of the cases that I've seen, I haven't done it, but I think it's mostly because you don't have any data sets where you can do research on it. Maybe again if you have healthcare. Just quickly to discuss, to explain what content-based filtering is, and then I will move on to collaborative filtering, which will be the focus of this talk. If you have a user profile, which is basically usually just a list of things consumed, and I love the fact that you used the Ex Machina film before, because that's also the one that I use. We haven't talked about it, anyway. What happens is that you extract some kind of metadata out of about the content. In this case, I say, okay, you find three categories. One is that it's an action movie. The other thing is that, I'm sorry to spoil it for you that hasn't seen it, that the robot goes insane, and the last one is sci-fi. Then you go to your system and you find similar items, which is then, I came up with Star Wars, Terminator, and Die Hard, which you then sort in some kind of order of relevancy. The example that I did here was that, okay, so Terminator ticks all three of them, but it could also be something about what time of day it is, or where you're watching, what kind of device it is. There's always something you have to consider about the relevancy of the data, especially now that we're not just sitting at a desktop any longer. The other type, oh, sorry. Then there was the pros and cons about content-based filtering, sorry. The good thing about content-based filtering is that you don't need to know a lot about the users. As long as you have the metadata and the content, you can find similar things between them. This is very nice because one of the biggest problems you have is that when you train your recommender system is that you discover that most people want recommendations, but you don't know anything about them. The other thing is that you should consider is there is a little bit of a problem with this content-based similarity, is that if it works really well, then, for example, if you want to find similar things to a Spider-Man movie, then you'll get all the other Spider-Man movies. So it's not really something surprising. Again, scientific articles, maybe that's exactly what you want, but maybe not a whole evening on different Spider-Man readouts. Collaborative filtering, on the other hand, is about the connection between users and the items. There are two types of data that you talk about when you look at collaborative filtering. One is the explicit one where somebody does something and then they rate it with a couple of stars, or they do a like, or whatever they're called, hats and so on. For example, Jimmy, who watched Game of Thrones, he likes it, and so he gave it 4 stars. Another thing that has gained more traction as we all become more connected is that you look at people's behavior. You call it click data when it's on the internet, and if you have one of those things on your arm that also collects data all the time, you can use those kind of data also, which is just called implicit, means that you just record everything. No matter which type of data you have, what you can do is that you talk about that you create a rating matrix, which is kind of just a view of all your content, again, movies and people. And then you plot into these ones whatever the rating was. That's pretty easy with the explicit one, but with implicit one, you have to do something clever. Usually it means that if somebody bought something, means that you gave it a high rating. If somebody viewed it, it was a middle rating, and if somebody did almost nothing, it was a low rating. There's a lot of machine learning that can be done to translate this also. when you have a rating matrix like this, it looks like it's a kind of an easy problem. You just have a few empty spaces to fill out. But usually it actually looks more like this, in the sense that at this one, I found this mistake after I sent the slides today. I'm sorry about that. A data set that I've been working on is that it has 700,000 ratings of users from between 50 users, this 1,000 items, which turns into a matrix that is 1.7 billion cells and give a grand total of 0.04% non-zero cells in the rating matrix. That means that you're trying to predict on a data, you try to fill out, basically when you do a recommender system, where you try to fill out all these empty places. That's kind of hard if you only have that little data. So that's something to consider. But going back to my little example here, if you try to find a recommendation for Sarah, which is this one, what you do is that you try to find, just like with the content base, where you found similar things based on their content or the metadata, here you try to find similar content based on what people liked. So Sarah liked this one, but not this one so much. Then you just scan through and see if you can find other users that like the same. My sister down here that volunteered her picture, basically the same thing as Sarah did. You would say, okay, this is a similar user. But the good thing about this similar user is that she also liked another movie beyond the one Sarah saw. And so we can recommend Pete's Dragon to Sarah, and hence we have a recommender system. The thing, of course, is that the reason why it's collaborative is that there is, you should imagine that there is 53 or 52,999 other people than you in the system. So there is a good chance that somebody are kind of similar to you and therefore can recommend you something else. Yes, that was the important slide. The thing about having this very sparse data set is that what you really want to do is that you want to kind of extract the essence out of the matrix. And the idea is that, for example, now these two movies are quite different, but there is a lot of animated movies, which in the data right now, in the sense that if you try to draw it on a graph, then one cartoon would be that direction, another cartoon would be that direction, and the third one would be that direction, and so on. But what you want to do is that you want to have the system kind of extract the essence and maybe have a direction that says how much a cartoon it is or how much an action movie and so on it is. And that's the idea behind doing something you call matrix factorization. And so basically, if you have the rating matrix that we saw before, what you try to do is that we try to reduce the users into a smaller number of user factors and a smaller number of item factors. Basically, what we're doing is we look at this as vectors in a high-dimensional space, and then we try to reduce it into a smaller space where the information is extracted. It all becomes a little bit, I don't know how to explain it. It's pretty cool, I think. For example, here, if we look here, if we say that this one, we could say that there is one graph that shows in one end it goes towards action and the other one goes towards animation. Then we'll have these two things. Then we just needed one direction for these two movies, meaning that instead of a 2x2 matrix, we just had one factor here and one factor here instead. And then if we can do that, then possibly we can just do the dot product to the two vectors, and then we will have a prediction of a rating, or a prediction about how likely the person is to buy it or consume it, and so on. There are different ways, very complicated ways of trying to solve this problem. There is the first one that people came up with was the SVD, the single vector decomposition, which most people have looked at if they had any kind of mathematics on a little bit higher grade. Then there is something I call the Funk SVD, but it's also known as the SVD++. And then I added something called autoencoders, which is the neural network version of it. It's not something that you normally consider as matrix factorization, but I'll get back to why I added that anyway. So just quickly to go through these three things. I have no idea what time it is, how much time I spent. Okay, that's pretty good. Okay, so the SVD, what it does is that it makes it factorizes your rating matrix into 3 matrices. You can say, but okay, I had 1 and now I have 3. How would that help me? But the thing is that the way that it works is that you can interpret the first one as the user. Each of those ones is the user factors. The last one is the item factors. And then you have this diagonal matrix here in the middle, which basically works by showing you how much information there is in each factor. So you can take this middle matrix, and then you can add up how much of the information, in the sense that if you add all the numbers up, you have 100% of the information that you had in the original data. Then you can say that, okay, I want only the 80% of the data to be represented. The way you can say that representing data is how accurate would it be if I take one of the ratings that I have already. Can I find that by doing the dot product of these factors that I did? If I take the whole one, then it should be very close to, while if I reduce them to smaller factors, it would be very a worse approximation. The thing is with this is that when you do the SVD, it looks at the matrix as a whole. We just saw that 0.04% of it was numbers, the rest was just nothing. This is not defined if you don't put in something into these numbers. And it kind of end up with you trying to guess what you should put into these numbers to do the factorization in a good way, because otherwise it won't make any sense. In the sense, everybody looks a bit tired. I don't know if I'm losing you here. Anyway, so you have the matrix full of zeros. If you add zeros, then basically your factorization, what it would be optimized to, is to predict zeros everywhere. Then you can say, okay, I will normalize my rating so it is 0 in the mean. So, but still, it will just end up with you predicting normal or the average rating all the time. On top of that, calculating this factorization is really, really difficult. It takes a long time and it requires a lot of memory because you have to put everything into memory. There was something called the Netflix prize competition some years ago. There was a guy called Simon Funk who came up with this idea. I'm a bit unsure whether there was some research that leading up to him, but he's very famous for doing it. So if anybody thinks that I'm discrediting somebody, I'm sorry about it. But anyway, he thought about this thing that to do the matrix factorization, you were focusing on all the zeros or all the unknowns. So basically what he thought was that, okay, so if we have this factorization, basically what we need to do is that we need to find some values of the user factors, which we multiply, or we do the dot product with the item factors, and then we have to get the ratings more or less like we saw them before. So basically what he wants to do is that he wants to do a matrix that is the user factors, a matrix that are the item factors, and then he wants to create them such that he minimizes the difference between the actual ratings and those factors. And that's great because suddenly you take your problem from trying to focus on all the zeros to only focusing on the things that you actually know, because you know these ratings. Then afterwards you can say, okay, I want to predict the rating. I just do the dot product between a row and a column. Of course, there are things that can go terribly wrong, and one of the things is that you can do overfitting, meaning that you specialize your factors too much to the data. So you put an extra part to the equation, which takes care that it gets closer to the data, but it still doesn't get over specialized to the data. To solve this problem, there are two different, again, there is merits of ways of doing it, but there is basically two that you usually discuss. There is the stochastic gradient descent, which everybody loves. It's basically, if you've ever seen the hill where you imagine that you're a blind man and then you're looking for the minimum or going to the top of the hill, one of the two. There is another one, which this one is generally agreed that this is the best heuristic to solve this problem, because you can't guarantee that it's always the optimal solution you find this way. Neither with this one. Actually, a lot of people agree that this one is a little bit worse, This one is implemented in Spark and is easily distributable. So that's why I think that this one is going to be the most used one right now. Okay. Thinking about that suddenly you were liberated from doing the matrix factorization with the SVD, people started thinking, but maybe doing the item factors and the user factors and item factors, maybe there were some other things that you could actually fit into this algorithm. So you could say that a rating here, sorry for the big R instead of the small r, is basically composed that there is a global average that everybody do. Then there are the grumpy raters or the happy raters. I don't know how many Danes there is, but usually I compare the people from Jutland with the people of Zealand. The people of Jutland say it could be a lot worse, and the people from here say that, ooh, it's great. The same thing, there is items that are generally agreed that they're better. When I tried this talk before, I said Lord of the Rings was generally considered a good movie, and everybody was booing me out. But anyway, there are things that are considered generally better, so they would have a positive bias. And then the only thing that is actually missing that will be the connection between the user and the item will be this little part. This means that this would be, the numbers will be a very small part of it. But it's very interesting to say that how to say, you cannot take out all the biases from the factorization, so you can let your algorithm focus on exactly what is important. The next one that also came around was to, how about we say that Lord of the Rings, for example, I think that that's a Friday night movie, while Sunday morning I like comedies or something like that. So even if I love one movie, then at some time I would love it more, it would be more relevant for me than at other times. And again, as I talked about another time earlier, was that you can also look into context and say that what is the context? Am I sitting in a train on my phone, or am I sitting at my laptop? I don't have a clinical comparison today. But the thing about these things is that they're all good, and it seems in theory that they work great, but we don't have enough data. I don't know what kind of data sets that you sit with usually, but for me, I haven't experienced anywhere where I had enough data to say that people like something better in the evening than in the morning. In the sense, you're lucky if you just have enough data to do a decent recommender system, not so much whether it's in the morning or not. But of course, more data is always being accumulated, so more data should do this thing. The last one that I wanted to mention was, it was also one of the algorithms that you mentioned shortly, or you talked about a GAN, but this is just an autoencoder. An autoencoder is quite an interesting construct. It's a neural network, not a deep neural network, because they tried it out, but they don't seem to have a better result out of it than just using its simple neural network. And the idea with an autoencoder is that you say that I have some input, and I want to teach it to show exactly the same output as I gave it as input. And then you can say, but why do you want to do that? But the idea is that you didn't say that, well, you want to pass it through a space that is much smaller than where your input were. So you kind of condense it into some less information. And that's why I wanted to bring this one in along with the matrix factorization, because the idea behind it is basically the same, that you take some noisy data and then you condense it, and then you come out with some output. Magically, this one works by saying that if for each user, for example, I think this picture is for the items, but it's similar. For each user, you take and say, okay, if it was Sarah from before, she liked this movie, she hasn't watched this movie. Or maybe she didn't like it, but you watched it, and so on. And then for each user, you train this out. And then for the example that we saw before was that you had the example where Sarah had watched some films and my sister had watched some other films. And these values that you train inside the stomach of it, saying, okay, but if somebody liked this movie, then they probably also like this movie that wasn't something that Sarah had watched in the beginning, because it was trained to do that. A lot of people had watched those ones, they also like this one. So in a sense, you train it to give out predictions on what kind of recommendation or which ratings that people would give on items that they haven't seen. And while you're running it, you can always test to see if it actually comes out with the same ratings as what you put in the beginning. It's not something that I'd put into production, so I don't know how well it's working, but I'm playing around with it, and I think it's pretty cool. There is a lot of other machine learning, deep learning algorithms that are out there to be used to create recommender systems. But in 30 minutes, there is only so little time to say. So I think that this is the only one that I had. One thing that I wanted to note was that I talked about there was two things that a recommender system should do. It was when my sons saw the landing page and then what should be watched next. There are some very interesting work being done on RNNs, deep learning networks, where it's considered what is the next best action, which is also used in the bank world, I think, and so many other important places. The pros and cons, there is a mistake in this slide, and I'm sorry I saw it again afterwards. You don't need to know anything about the user in the sense that you need to know what kind of movies they like or their interactions between the data, but you don't need to have any metadata about the content. So you can just say that that your content is number 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. But of course, if you don't know anything about the behavior of the user, then you can't recommend anything. Since with the content-based recommender, you can find similar things as soon as you have the metadata. With collaborative filtering, you can't do anything without any data, since it counts for both of them. So I think that all the algorithms that I talked about tonight are pretty interesting. So what is the best one to choose? And it depends a little bit on who you talk with, of course, because everybody loves something. I think that content-based is very interesting because the NLP, natural language processing community, is coming up with fantastic things that can find similar descriptions of content that is very interesting. But most will say that using implicit data in websites to create recommendations are the thing to go right now, because you just record it very fast and keeps coming more. So a matrix factorization with collaborative filtering is usually the one that you should do. But the thing is that you can just build one and then build another one, and then you can do what you call an ensemble afterwards, in the sense that you can take one or more recommenders and then use those ones as input into a linear regression, and then that would spit out some new recommendations. And that would, for example, solve your problem where you say that if I have two lines of data that I want to show, the content-based and the collaborative filtering, then sometimes one will show something, another time another one will show something. But if you kind of mix them together and their signals go in different ways, then together you can create a better recommender system. How much time do I have now? Okay, good. Oh, well, I can, if I get time, then. So I mentioned already the problem with the new users. And one of the questions that I had, the times that I had a presentation, is always somebody coming, yes, but what do we do when we don't know anything about the user? And the thing is that if you don't know anything about the user, then you cannot do personalization, because personalization means that it's personalized to you. So what should you do? Of course, there are some tricks that you can say, okay, if I know that the person is from Copenhagen, then I can say that popular things from Copenhagen, or if I know it's a man or a woman, and so on. There are things, of course, that you can try to kind of sneak in, but personalization only works if you know something about them. Of course, you can use the content-based filtering. If usually a user arrives to your page, shows some interest to something, and then content-based recommendations would show you something else, or some simpler algorithms altogether. But anyway, unpersonalized recommendations, which just means the most popular items, also work very well, because you should remember that they're very popular because a lot of people like them. So we like personalization, but in the end, we also like a lot of the same things, because otherwise it wouldn't be popular. New content, on the other hand, is a little bit more interesting. Interesting because you can actually do a little bit more. Of course, you can say that that everybody tried to promote new content, putting into a new arrival list or something like that. But you can also use your time exploring it, and of course you can always use the content-based recommender. A way to explore new items is using something they call explore exploit, a simple algorithm that I have known as the E-greedy multi-arm bandit, a long name. For basically what it does is that you just every time somebody should see a recommendation, you throw a dice or take a random number, and then you say, okay, if it's 1 to 5, then I show a recommendation. If it's not, then I take a random new item and then stuff it in. Of course, you can do it a little bit more intelligent and try to see, like, it's you can say that if it's somebody who likes horror movies, then put in a horror movie or something like that. But still, to keep the circle going, you need to add new data to everything. This is something that is used a lot when you talk about news, because if you have news, then it's fine that the best article that was great an hour ago, nobody wants to read it now. So if you don't keep the circle of new items coming in all the time, then you have a problem. There was another point I wanted to say, but that slipped out again. So, but now everybody here, I guess, knows what machine learning is, so I won't bore you too much about how you evaluate machine learning algorithms. The thing that I want to point out is that you should remember that a model, machine learning, learns exactly what you teach them. And that's something that is interesting, especially when you talk about recommender, especially when you talk about recommender systems, because the truth, the data that you have, is not the ground truth, in the sense that you might think that somebody likes something, but maybe he just liked it because his girlfriend was sitting next to him, or he just liked it yesterday or something like that. And you can say that if you are predicting rain or something like that, then you're pretty sure that it was raining that day. It's undisputable. While the data that you're using for the recommender system, you don't know if it's really true. So you should try and aim for how do you say, to train an algorithm so it kind of works with the data that you have. But you should remember that it's probably the data has been, you have collected the data using a recommender system, which is worse than the one that you are implementing, because otherwise, why would you implement another one? So, what is the, yeah, and then there is this talk about, you can, a lot of people say that we should do deep learning. And you get very specialized models when you do deep learning. And people you know a lot about when you do a recommender system will be serviced very well with a deep learning network, because it can find everything that is special about it. But it's my experience that it's actually better if your model is a little bit buggy, because then you also give the chance for the system to recommend things that are actually not perfect, and maybe it's a little bit wrong, but that also helps people to see something else. Because one of the problems about always having things recommended is that you have this filter bubble, which means that your taste would always be more and more narrow, and soon you won't know anything about it. So shouldn't cut down on DR, for example, because that gives you a lot of different choices to watch in television, instead of only Netflix, where you watch the same thing all the time. So deep learning is fun, but yeah. Another random few things that I wanted to say is that a recommender system is only as good as its content. So I basically never had a conversation with somebody who said, this Netflix recommender, it's really horrible, why can it be so popular? But if you only like French documentaries or superhero movies, then there are 10 movies you like between all the 10,000 movies. And then what should it recommend afterwards? You try to be the recommender when your girlfriend or boyfriend or your partner comes home late in the night and are tired, and then you find something they want to show or they want to watch. In a sense, so remember always that the best algorithm won't produce anything that is not there. So that's one thing. The second thing is that we assume that taste is not changing because we are optimizing to data that is historical. And again, if it's rain, then it's probably, well, the environment is changing, but again, the data is changing. As soon as your recommender system will start working, then there will be business people saying, but if people listen to this recommender system, then maybe if this product that we earn a little bit more on, could we maybe push that on top? And that's a good thing for business, but you have to remember that trust comes at a cost. And if people think that you are being personalized because people like you watch something, then they don't like to discover that something is just being recommended to you. Then it's an ad and you shouldn't trust it, says the man who sells ad for a living. Another discussion is that people say that if you do machine learning, then you shouldn't try to restrict the output that comes out of it, because then there is a feedback loop. That's also true, but you should also remember that a classical example is that when we did the BT recommender, the data that we have, there was a lot of people who watched Cinderella and Saw together. And I want to liberate the machine learning algorithms, but I don't want my son to watch Cinderella and then have recommended Saw afterwards. So you should consider that maybe sometimes it's good to hold the hand of the machine learning algorithm also and put some business restrictions on it. Just to finish off, recommenders can do a lot. They don't do magic. And then if you want to know more, then have a look at my book. Or come and ask me. I don't know if I have time to answer questions or...
We're going to move on to the next
okay.
talk.
Anyway.
Things are moving on.
Yeah.
We'll share that in the follow-up email that goes out to everyone tomorrow.
Yeah.
But also, obviously, they can grab it there as well.
Yeah. Anyway, I'm happy. I love recommender systems, so find me afterwards and let's talk about it. Thank you. Oh, let's...
Yeah, awesome. Let's change the batteries in these. Give me a second, guys. Much of a weekend for you.
No, honestly. I'll just snap
This is
it
the
in.
magic. This is the magic of cinema.
That's why they invented gaffer tape, actually.
Oh yeah, very true.
So,
Always improving.
always improving. Awesome.
Okay, let me just see the left guide on this. So that goes forward.
Yeah,
And then you can use
I have one in the bag, actually.
Oh, lucky man.
So, yeah. Well, it doesn't do me much good in the bag. Right, so I guess I'm what stands between you and pizza. It's always a nice place to be. So just the last bit of talk, I'm going to lift it up a level and not talk too much about a specific model, but more sort of the general challenges that we face when we do this kind of machine learning where I'm sitting, because we all know it's more fun to talk about challenges than actually historical stuff that we actually made work. So I'm sitting at Danske Bank, and normally I would start to actually introduce Danske Bank, but I guess after the last couple of days, people know who we are. So I'll just introduce my group. Our group is one of 3 centers of excellences in terms of advanced analytics, machine learning, data science, and we are counting 24 heads in our group. And if we include everything around the different departments, which includes fraud, credit risk, anti-money laundering, all these kind of popular things, we're probably about 100, 200 people doing modeling within the bank. So essentially, among the 24 of us, there is some data scientists, some more traditional old school analysts doing more BI stuff, a few what we call engagement managers. They're essentially our project managers, just with a bit of advertising internally as well. So they go out and tell people how cool we are, because that's one of the things we're really bad at, telling people how cool we are. And then lastly, one of the great additions we had to the team is an information architect. So, and the roles of these is essentially that the analysts are very much focused on the descriptive part of it. They have massive legacy in SAS and SQL, and us data scientists, we try to be a bit more hip and not tell people that we also use SAS, but we more focus on stuff that we do in Python. And we do mostly the predictive analytics, and that's what we're going to be centering out today. And then the engagement managers, they're essentially trying to keep us all in line. And the information architect is all about trying to figure out all the data we have in the bank. Essentially, I think the current count is we have 3,000 data sources, so it's a lot to keep track of when you're data scientists just want to actually do your work. So that's why we have people who are actually trying to go out and find this data for us, because this comes from everything. Every time you use a credit card, anything like that, it registers as a transaction system. Every time you go into the website, that's another transaction. Every time you change address, all the things that you do will probably somewhere figure in one of our systems. So this slide before Big Brother's watching you. But essentially, we have a lot of data, and it's very hard to actually maneuver. So that's why we have the information architects. Right. So just to sort of give you a sense of what is working, and this is one of the things that surprised me when I got into banking 2.5 years ago, because I came from email marketing. And email marketing was very smash and grab, very fast. A day was a long time. Then you get into banking and say, well, we usually predict on somewhere between a 3 months and 3 year time horizon. And we don't really know the result until that period has passed. So if we're doing short-term predictions, that's usually between 3 months, we might even barrel down to 1 month if we're really, really on the edge. But this also means that when we actually set sail and actually do things, we needed to actually make sure that it has an impact on the business. So we have ground rules saying if we can't measure the effect within a couple of months, we're not doing the project at all. So that's what we center everything around. So we start off, and you can tell this is one of the strategy slides, so I've just sort of lopped in because then my manager will be very happy with me. But essentially, we start off with the strategy and the customer. Essentially, part of the strategy is make the customer happy, because then they usually stay with us, and that's a good key to growth over time. And we start with as little data as we can get away with, and then we basically just move upwards. And then comes a lot of education with the business, because there's a lot of our job is also making the business understand what is it we're doing. Even though we have a few hundred people doing this, a lot of people are actually not aware what you can do with data. So we do spend a lot of time educating the business on why is it that we're doing this and what's the benefit of it. Because deep down, people have to actually believe that this is working before they will actually adopt and start using it. And this is where the human touch starts to come in. So we spend a lot of time actually having people understand what it is that we're doing. And then finally, we execute. And out of maybe a 6-month project cycle, we might spend 1 or 2 months at most actually doing the modeling. The rest is understanding the business and doing those kind of things. And of course, going back and measuring the impact. So everything we do is usually forced through this. Still a very wide scenario, but that's what we need to have everything mapped up against. And then, of course, we have to have something to chase. So the thing we do in our department, which is called commercial analytics, is that we try to make ourselves as relevant to the customer as possible. Actually, if you look at some of the surveys we ask the customer, first of all, have you been contacted, yes or no, and was it relevant? And then compare to what's customer satisfaction. And yes, I have removed the numbers. Customer satisfaction has dropped a bit recently. But one thing we see is that if we provide someone with some kind of contact, some kind of communication they don't find to be relevant, they're actually less satisfied than if we didn't contact them at all. So every time we try to contact someone, it's essentially a gamble. Did we actually hit the right on the money or not? Because we see the similar boost if we're actually relevant. So this whole thing is everything we chase in our group, to be as relevant to the customer as entirely possible. And then the second thing, this is what also makes it a bit interesting. If you're purely in a digital world, you have a very nice feedback loop. You can put things into motion, you get the result, and you get the feedback right away. Like if you do a recommender system, you see what people click, very easy. All our sales go through an advisor. So essentially someone sitting out there at the end in a room with a customer doing God knows what, or whoever you believe in, spaghetti monsters or whatnot. We have no clue, and at the end of the day, we get a press of button, say it ended with a sale, it didn't end with a sale, it ended with another meeting, and we know that click is about right in 10% of the times. So we have a great asset, because basically all customers, no matter how satisfied they are, usually say, my advisor was great, but. We have great assets. We know they deliver a great customer experience. They can also fix all our shortcomings when we model, because if we didn't hit right on the money, they can sort of steer it in the right direction afterwards. So we love these guys. But they are massive source of noise to our data as well. And they're also fairly expensive compared to a digital channel. So that means if we're actually using these people, we need to use them in the right way. So we only need to use them for the most relevant cases. And for all the other cases, we might do a bit more hit and miss in a digital channel. But the advisor is our key, and no matter what product you try to get, or most of them, you at some point talk to a human being. And that's sort of the key thing. That's what we also need. We're fighting and we're benefiting at the same time. So just to give you a breakdown on what relevance is, because we can't really go out and measure relevance. Relevance is something you perceive. Like if you had a recommended system, we're just going to continue the loop of referring the previous one. We don't really know if I send you a message about something written in a different way, we don't know if you found it relevant or not. So we need to break it down. And there's 4 sort of main areas that we break it down into. There's the channel, essentially. How do you choose to communicate with you? Is it a letter? Is it in person? Is it a phone call? Is it some other digital channel, smoke signals, whatever we choose? That's the channel. Then there's the content. That's essentially what do we put into that message. A timing is what are we actually showing to you, and when are we actually showing this to you? And then the last bit, which is probably the most hard, is the familiarity. How well do you identify yourself as being a customer with us? Because that gives us more or less leeway on how we should actually talk to you. So if you take the last one, if you just become a customer of the bank, of course you have to fill in a lot of forms. But if we then hit you with everything we know about you in the first communication, that's going to seem really off. So that should be more sort of toned down. And we're saying, just welcome to the bank, yada, yada, and build up trust over time. But if you've been a customer for 20 years, you don't want a generic message. So we have to hit the right level of familiarity. At the same time, we shouldn't talk to you about stuff you don't need. That's sort of bad. And we shouldn't try to talk to you at the day where you're in a meeting or when you're sitting here when you have more important stuff to do, like listen to me. And we shouldn't talk about products that are not coming in the right order if you have some other things you need more. So that all into the timing. The content is basically how to phrase yourself. Should we be more sort of loose, or should we be more formal? Should we go fact first, or should we go emotion first? All these kind of things goes into the content. And lastly, the channel is, do you actually have a preferred way of communicating with us? And does this actually vary with what you're talking about? Someone like me, if I'm getting, let's say, an overdraft facility, basically I can extend more than I have in my bank account. I can do that online. But if I'm buying a house for let's say, 6 million, I probably want to talk to someone before I know I'm making the right choice. So at least I have a channel preference that depends on what it is I'm actually getting. And most people will have this. So all this is sort of what goes into that whole relevance. There's probably a lot more, but this is just what I could jot down in an hour or so. And if you look at what we previously were doing up to 2016-ish, that's the one in the black box, essentially just trying to predict whether you want a new product. That's a long way to go. And that's essentially what we're trying to talk about, is how we're actually getting beyond this, just predicting, could you use a new product in 3 months? So this is essentially what we're talking about today. And also, the way we were using the models is perhaps not the best, it's not the worst, but it's definitely not the best. They've mainly been used as a sorting algorithm. So essentially, let's say that we want to do a campaign for an investment product. Then we run a model saying, okay, who wants investment products in 3 months? And then we take the top 1,000, call those people. Then it's essentially a sorting algorithm. There's no sort of threshold that doesn't filter in any way. And because we have so many customers compared to how many we can call, this still works, but it's not the best way to use it. So this is something where we should also try to improve. But this is essentially what we've been doing up until a year and a half ago, 2 years ago. So there's a few issues. First of all, we just say investments, home finance, when we tell the advisor, go talk to these people. But within that, there's a myriad of products. There's a myriad of different ways you can tailor that service. And every customer in the bank has their own unique tailored product, because it depends a lot on who you are, what you're rated for, and what your needs are. So essentially, we give the advisor basically a big blank slate saying, something within this, go fetch. And advisors who are actually advisors, not salesmen, that's not really what they like. So we need to try to fix that. Also, even though we do 3 months, which usually in many machine learning problems is a long time to predict ahead, it's way too short for them. If you do, say, home finance, you want to buy a house, that's usually 1-2 years you're thinking about this. And we want to get on board as early on as possible to help steer the process, partly so you actually have the home finance mortgage with us, but also to give a good customer experience. Should have probably been the other way around than that. And last one, we make all the leads, all the people they should contact available to the devices, because we don't have a filtering, we just have sorting. And like any other human being, they choose the ones where they are the most certain to get a good experience. So they choose the customers they already know. So there you actually have essentially, it's not really a collaborative filtering, it's one-man filtering, but they filter based on their own experience. So that's essentially what we're trying to solve. And this also means that we had to evolve a tech stack. I figured doing this kind of talk, I need to have at least one slide with all the fancy logos of technologies. So well, we've seen a move strictly from a SaaS, and the banking has a huge SaaS legacy, so that's why we have SaaS, and SQL Server, to including more modern things. Python is prevalent in many areas of the bank, especially in ours, and then with PySpark and a Hadoop cluster on top. There are other technologies floating around, and we are going into deep learning within the next year too, but frankly, because of the noise levels we've had in other stages of the process, deep learning hasn't really been that relevant because it couldn't provide enough for us to actually use. We would rather have a rapid prototyping, getting out there, see what customers said, than spending 1.5 to 2 years building the architecture for neural network. Also because the type of problems we're doing, you can't do a whole lot of transfer learning for it. So that's why deep learning has sort of been sitting back with us, because we don't have images, these kind of things. There's some with the LSTMs, if you're into the whole sequence translation, that you can map into a customer journey, but that's a whole other ball of wax, and we might get into that. But essentially, I'm a Python guy, so that's also why it came so high on the slide. But we're working sort of, we don't really have the world languages, but these are the two who are existing in co-harmony with us. Right. So what I want to show you now is 4 different examples on how we're trying to break this curse of these issues we had before. And these are the last 4 slides, so we're actually almost going to hit it on the nose, unless a lot of people have a lot of questions. So that's the warning to you. The first one is that we saw that people churning, essentially people leaving the bank, 3 months ahead was way too short for anyone to do anything. Because at that point, they were at the last plateau where you have the number 1 or the I. That's where most of the churners came from. But at this point, they've already started moving their mortgages, everything away from us. So essentially, even though we got in touch with them there, the save rate, getting them back on boat, was basically almost none, because we could tell that you were churning in the next 3 months, but we couldn't do anything about it. So we needed to extend further back. And essentially, what we started doing was trying to estimate proxies. So 3 months ahead of you, either moving your mortgage or your number of transactions dropping, any kind of thing that could act as a predictor of you entering this churn phase later on, we moved back and actually predicted those instead. So this gives you all of a sudden 6 to 9 months of heads up for someone actually leaving, without us having to actually extend the data, because if we go more than 3 months back, we need to have a lot more data to actually predict that far ahead. So this was sort of a way to get around it, and this was essentially an ensemble of random forest and gradient boosting and other nice tree-based models, taking in a lot of sort of company data, what products you have, how much you pay in fees, what your incomes are, what's the volumes, number of transactions, the volumes of transactions, all these kind of things that are just lying around within our systems. And this actually meant that we could actually reduce number of the churn number by about 30% just by doing this, because we got on board that further on in the process. And for something like churn, just moving 3 months back makes a huge difference. Another way we can go into it is saying, instead of just giving them the blank category, say, okay, well, anything within investments, just go ahead, talk to the person, figure out what they want. Might try to go to a product level. Even though the products are very much unique for a customer's customer, they're still sort of labeled the same thing. That might be 5 or 6. If you know June, the app, that's one investment product. There's a few others that I can't remember because I don't have enough money to actually put into them. But there's some investment products. And essentially moving from just saying, okay, we view this internally as investment, going to more the customer perspective, saying, I have some of money just sitting in my account. I'm not getting any interest for it. How can I actually get something back for it? Just flipping it around from the customer perspective was something I wanted to do as well. And then at the same time, giving the advisor something to lead up with, saying, okay, let's say that I get product 1, this could be June. Then a conversation started saying, have you heard about June? Which might make more sense than if I didn't have enough money to get into one of the more managed investment products, which usually take a fair bit of capital to get into. So this was a way to actually get it into this. And this is actually a work in progress that one of our master students are doing right now. And one of the things he also had to test was, could we actually get the same level of prediction when we go into product level at this stage compared to when we actually just category? And you actually find that on product versus no product, he gets the same kind of prediction. So it's actually, there's no additional work for us to go into that, but there's an added benefit. Even though the confusion matrix in here is pretty confused, it still gives a way to start up and actually suggest something. So this is something that we actually see, and this is something that we've been quite happy for him to actually find out, because it's a way to add new information to our advisors. And essentially, at the end of the day, they're the one facing the customer, that we need to give them everything we can upfront. Right. So we were talking about just moving 3 months for, I know it's a lot of text in this, and I apologize. 3 months earlier for churn was a good thing. If you're talking about home finance, you need to move 1 to 1.5 years before. That becomes excessively tricky, because we do have that much data. Most of it is stored on magnetic tape somewhere. So you can't, it's not readily available. And the Hadoop cluster has only been around for a few years, so we haven't accumulated that much data. Though they're loading it in, it actually takes a fair bit of time to get the data from magnetic tape somewhere in the storage and on there. It's sort of the physicality of the problem, that's the issue here. But they were actually trying to do a model of just predicting, are you somewhere in the process of wanting to buy a home? Not do you want the home finance product, or do you want the mortgage, but are you somewhere in where you're actually contemplating it? And they actually did a pilot. I'm just going to read the numbers out for you because they're a bit blurry in this. They actually called about 200 people. About 11% they didn't get a hold of. That's the usual problem when you try to call people, that they have better things to do than talk to us. But of the rest, they actually managed to hit a 50-50 split in success. And this is out of calling. We have about, let's say, 1 million customers in Denmark. And if you look at in Denmark, there's about 4,500 homes sold every year. And that's not even just calling the people who are getting the first home, which this was focusing on. So getting 50-50 split is actually quite good for this. And most of them were actually, these 96 people that were the successes were actually some point in the process, meaning that we can start a conversation with them. So this is actually a way to tell the advisors, talk to these people. We don't know where they're in the process, but we know they're in the process, and talk about getting their first home, which is often a very emotional state. So that's why you need the human interaction as well. Cool. One last example, because we want to go deeper than this. So far, we talked about the endpoint of getting sort of the product, all these kind of things. Usually, that's not what matters for people. Getting the product, whatever it is, we're pulling off the shelves, you couldn't care less about whether it's one or the other. What you care about is the emotional journey on the way. This is, again, buying a home. So first of all, you think about getting a home. Then you go in, maybe, if you're lucky, you go to our website, or you go to some other website. You might actually at some point be convinced that we could be a bank to work with, so you start some digital onboarding. You have a lot of meetings, welcome calls, all the things you have to do to get into a bank. Start receiving cards. We might push a few other products on you, and then you get to transferring things in and you start actually getting your home mortgage. This is a very long, very excruciating process when you just want a house. So actually, but one of the things you see is that this is actually getting a house, or getting a new house is actually when people mostly change banks. So it's a very ripe market to actually get new customers. So what we want to do, instead of just saying, okay, we need to predict whether or not you get to the end, is that we want to predict every step of the way where we can, every touch point, do you actually fall off here or not? And essentially the people who are about to look like it's going to fall off, extra attention, those special care. I'm done now, actually. So this is sort of what we're pushing to. This is more work we're actually planning right now. We don't know if we can do it, but we're going to try it out. So this essentially, we have the human factor of the advisor. We need to help them all we can, do all the homeworks for them, so they can essentially just have the great call with the customer. And this is how we see us going forward. And of course, it goes deeper than that after that. So apologies, 4.5 minutes overdue, but hope you got something from it. And pizza!